Thank you. OA Preamble. Overeaters Anonymous is a fellowship of individuals who, through shared experience, strength, and hope, are recovering from compulsive overeating. We welcome everyone who wants to stop eating compulsively. There are no dues or fees for members. We are self-supporting through our own contributions, neither soliciting nor accepting outside donations. OA is not affiliated with any public or private organization, political movement, ideology, or religious doctrine. We take no position on outside issues. Our primary purpose is to abstain from compulsive eating and compulsive food behaviors, and to carry the message of recovery through the 12 steps of OA to those who still suffer. How our meeting works. At this meeting, we follow a rotating format. On the second week of the month is a recovered OA speaker who will be speaking in the topic of their choosing for 30 minutes. There will be a follow-up Q&A segment for 15 minutes, where fellows are welcome to ask any questions of our speaker, which are related to the topic in question. Disclaimer, this meeting will be recorded by audio only, and you will see a recording sign at the top of your screen. The Q&A section of our meeting will also be recorded. Please post only in the chat function your question to our host, Rosie, and we will ask a question anonymously on your behalf. Please do not do this before the Q&A segment opens. Seventh tradition. Before we share, it is time for our seventh tradition. Also, we are meeting electronically. We still have Zoom meeting costs to pay, and we also give contributions to OAU KEB, which is our virtual intergroup. Please make a contribution using the PayPal or bank details that will be entered in the chat now. Newcomers, we ask that you wait to contribute until you are sure you want to be here. So do we have it? Yeah, we have details in the chat now. Thank you. Today is a speaker meeting, and we are honored to have Rosie. And Rosie, over to you. And thank you. Thank you for doing service.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. It's always amusing to the idea that it would be an honor to be anywhere. My name is Rosie. I am a compulsive overeater, and I'm very grateful to be able to call myself recovered for today. I chose the topic, and we have ceased fighting, because, well, I can say now this isn't going to be a share on step 10. For those of you who are new, welcome. It works. It really works. I've just been making cake with my children. I didn't eat any. The whole house smells of cake, and none went into my mouth, nor did it even occur to me to put it in my mouth. I don't know what witchcraft it is that makes this thing work. It's higher power, but it works. But yeah, for those of you who are new, the line that I'm discussing, and I will read the paragraph shortly, is from a group of promises. We call them promises in the big book, where it starts talking about all the great things that are going to happen as a result of the recovery that we get through the 12 steps. And they're connected to our daily participation in step 10. So it would be remiss of me not to just say as a side note that step 10, I really believe, is on a day-to-day basis the main reason that I remain abstinent today, entirely abstinent. I have and did, manage to abstain from all sorts of things, behaviors, process and substance addictions before step 10 became a daily part of my life, but I could not stay abstinent from the food until it was a part of my daily life, come what may. that's all I've got to say about step 10. I instead wanted to talk about surrender, because that's what this is really about for me. That's what ceasing fighting is for me. And that's what I feel that I've been really working on in the last few months. So I'll start off by reading this passage. It's at the bottom of page 84. And there are times when this passage makes me tearful. To me, it's just so beautiful. Not only the wording, but what it promises when I think of where I've come from. And I will briefly qualify before I start talking about this, ceasing fighting and what that means to me in my relationship with my higher power. Bottom of page 84. And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time, sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. And that's so key for me. We will see that our new attitude towards liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. What a miracle. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. And I will qualify shortly and sort of tell you briefly about my story and how the hell that I was in when I arrived in this fellowship 13 years ago. But the important thing for me here is that I'm not fighting food, nor am I avoiding temptation. As I just said, I've just been knee deep in cake mixed with my kids. I'm okay, I'm fine. And I'm not fighting it. And, fighting food for me in the past took various forms, but the common theme was that I always lost. Always. Sometimes I would lose within 5 minutes. Sometimes it would be 5 hours. Occasionally, very occasionally, I made it 5 days, but I always lost. And what's extraordinary to me now is that if I get in a fight with the food, and it doesn't happen often, although it does happen, and I have plenty of dear friends on the meeting tonight who have had calls from me saying, the food's loud, I'm scared. And that happens, when I'm not taking care of my spiritual condition. But when I do start fighting the food these days, on those rare occasions, it looks like, maybe I should have my dinner at 4 p.m. Or maybe I should add a few extra grams of this into the food processor, because by the time I've scraped it out, I won't get my set number of grams that I'm meant to have for this certain type of food. Those are the kind of fights that I would find myself getting into these days if I'm not in fit spiritual condition. And the common theme these days is that those thoughts never win. I was about to say I always win, but I don't win. It's my higher power that enables me to win. I'm not fighting. I'm truly not fighting. So to backtrack briefly, my story, I am a real deal compulsive overeater. I'm not a moderate case at all. I'm not mild. My parents were hiding sugar from me by the age of 6. I was very nearly sacked from my first job for eating chips off a customer's plate directly before serving them. And it didn't even occur to me until my boss dragged me into a room to shout at me that was, unacceptable. I got arrested for shoplifting sweets when I was 14. And what they didn't know, and of course I didn't tell them because I was so fundamentally dishonest then, was that I had been shoplifting sweets and chocolate for months from that sweet shop. And just for the record, I have obviously made full amends since. I am somebody who binges in urine-soaked alleyways. I've binged in many, many toilets and bathrooms. I've binged in children's playgrounds. That used to be one for me because nobody back then knew that nobody that I knew had kids, so it was a safe place to hide. I've binged in my car. I've binged in multi-story car parks. I've binged in dark places at night where no woman should be on their own. And I'm a delusional compulsive overeater as well. You know, I have had many times in my life where I've just gone for it and bought a massive bag of food and eaten it, but I'm more of the variety of just go to buy a chocolate bar and then 5 minutes later go and buy another, and then 5 minutes later go back. That's my pattern. I even in the worst throes of this disease, I would still believe that one would be enough. One was never enough. And one, you know, the important thing for me is that one will never be enough. It will just never be enough. That's why I can't have one. I can't have half or even a fraction, or so much as a gram. And actually, do you know what? A really brilliant illustration of how serious a compulsive overeater I am lies in some recent medical stuff that's been going on for me. Some really unpleasant medical stuff. I've just suddenly this horrible condition, histamine intolerance, has exploded into my life, and I have suddenly become appallingly intolerant to loads of foods, like agonizingly so. And what I find sort of tragicomic is that I have willingly given up 3/4, if not 4/5 of the food that I have eaten on a daily the foods that I've been eating on a daily basis. Like, and I really believe in eating like a queen. I don't just eat, you know, steamed fish and steamed broccoli. I really, even within entire abstinence, I believe in eating like a queen. And that means that I am somebody who goes to the bother of emailing a restaurant and making sure they make me a meal that I can eat that's entirely abstinent. I really love my food still, in spite of being entirely abstinent. And yet I have willingly given up probably 3/4, if not 4/5 of what I eat normally. And I'm not saying I'm finding it easy, but I have done that voluntarily because it has been making me feel so awful that I have no choice. And so, you know, treatment has begun, and hopefully it won't be like that forever. But it took me a life of absolute hell, and still I would not put down my alcoholic foods. I could not. I absolutely could not, even though I was at the gates of death with my compulsive overeating. So that's an idea of the kind of compulsive overeater I am. I sort of rumbled along in OA for several years, and I did fine. And, you know, I was abstinent. My definition then, you know, it's not what I would call abstinent now, but I did my best and I worked hard, and then I relapsed for 5 years. I came back, and, you know, it's sort of much the same thing. And I always knew that there was a greater level of surrender. I always knew. And then finally, one day I was on a meeting and I heard somebody who's here tonight sharing on the meeting. And I just remember thinking, what the hell is she doing? Whatever it is, I want to do that. And so I got a hold of her, and she told me that she was working, a big book focus program. And she told me about a Vision for You, which has become my home group. And in fact, she later agreed to sponsor me. And I knew within weeks that I was finally getting what I always knew was out there, and that I sometimes occasionally heard in people, but I'd never quite achieved myself, even though I had worked so hard at my program. I really, I wasn't working a program of half measures, but I had not had explained to me just the fundamental instructions in this book. And nobody had ever explained to me how they relate to me as a compulsive overeater. So it wasn't until I started using this book as pretty much my only recovery resource that I really found a working relationship with God. So that brings me to the present day, and my the thinking that I've been doing over the last few months, the explorations in surrender, which I have come to realize is ceasing fighting. And I'll just talk a little about a few areas in my life in which I have ceased fighting, and then some areas in my life where I've yet to cease fighting. I mean, as I said, clearly I've ceased fighting food now. It's always going to be there. I am a compulsive overeater for life. There is not one part of me that thinks that I will ever be cured of this thing, thank God. So it's not gone away. But as I said earlier, I rarely get into fights with food. And when I do, God immediately steps in. And that's because I'm willing to take action every day, that God is available to do that. for me. But here are some of the ways in which I have had to learn to cease fighting. I think the most important one is the way in which I relate to my higher power, which I call God. And for many years, I tried to relate to God in a way that I had been taught to relate to God in a, in a sort of mostly Christian country, which was that God was essentially a person with human traits, with whom I could talk in the English language and get back answers in English language sentences. And for years, I did prayers to you and he or she or they or them. And, and I said, I used to say all of the prayers that we say in recovery, and I felt nothing. And I learned about two-way prayer, and I would write back in the way that they say, I'd write my problem, and then God would write back saying, my dearest child, Rosie, that's not my God. That is not and has never been my God. And I sort of wish it was. I quite like the idea of a God with human traits and a human voice who just sort of speaks to me. And I know many, many, many people who have that kind of God. And I'm occasionally envious of them, because it's quite a straightforward God who is an entity, I guess, not a person, but an entity. I have had to cease fighting that conception of God, because it is not real for me. And when I try and relate to that conception of God, there is nothing there for me. I have finally ceased fighting in the last couple of years. I did a really painful long form big book study a couple of years ago, where there was a lot of looking at, conception of God. And I nearly had a breakdown during it, but I came out of it finally accepting that I couldn't have a conception of God. There was none for me. All I settled on was that if I asked questions, I got answers. And I've come to realize that, God for me is something inside me. And my partner, because my partner is deeply suspicious of the work I do in these rooms and deeply suspicious of anything spiritual, he just says, well, that's your intuition. And that's fine. I mean, call it intuition, call it whatever you like. All I know is that when I ask questions, I get answers. And so I have had to, particularly in the last few months, cease fighting and to stop trying to talk to God as if God is an entity, but to start talking to God, to start treating God as just using the word God as a word. And so I will have conversations with myself these days, but I know that the answers that come, they're not me, they're not Rosie's brain. They might be my intuition. I don't really know or care, but all I know is that that voice is loving and always has the right answers. And that as soon as I start fighting again and trying to fit in with the God that's sort of described in this book and, in other religions, there's nothing there for me. So that's been one of the biggest battles that I've realized I've had to just lose and just accept that my God is not this sort of like dynamic, personal, human trait filled God who speaks to me in English. My God is just what happens when I get quiet and I ask questions and I ask for directions. God is what is the other side of that. And I don't know what that is, and I don't need to know anymore. Another thing that I've had to cease fighting is my reality as a working mother in recovery. As those of you who are working their OA program through the big book will know, a lot of action is required. A lot of action. The steps are essentially a series of decisions and then related actions. And the book is very clear. I mean, I'm not one of these big book geeks. I wish I was, who have all of the sort of stats and facts and history. But I know that the word action probably comes, it appears tens of times in the text, if not more. There's a lot of action required, and I know from my own experience that the more action I put in, the closer to God I am. However, I work and I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and the 6-year-old has all sorts of additional stuff going on. And the reality is that I cannot do the stuff that I hear people saying I need to do to stay well. And I find that very frightening at times. You know, this meeting is a prime example. I would love to come to this meeting. So many of you are friends of mine. So many of you have taught me so much. So many of you are trusted Step 10 partners and friends and just wonderful people in my life. I would love to be here with you every Wednesday. The reality is my children need to go to bed on a Wednesday, and my partner is here sometimes on a Wednesday evening, but not often. You know, the reality is that there are many meetings that I desperately want to go to, but at this time in my children's life, that's not viable. My job is to be of maximum service, fit myself to be of maximum service to others. And much as I want that service to be to the still suffering compulsive overeater, the reality is that it can't be. And so some of the best meetings for me, I can't go to. There are incredible workshops. There are meetings in other fellowships that I would kill to get to. The reality is, and I have finally ceased fighting it, that I can't. I have a wonderful meeting on a Wednesday morning in another fellowship that I feel like my life depends upon that meeting. And I woke up this morning feeling sick because my 3-year-old was starting forest school and my 6-year-old had a school thing, and there was loads to do, and my partner and I were dealing with something last night and we didn't do all of the prep that we needed to do. And I woke up feeling sick because I desperately wanted to get to the meeting, and the reality was that I knew I couldn't. And so for me, one thing I've learned is that if I'm fighting, it's here. I can feel it here in my abdomen, towards the bottom of my rib cage. It's a physical sensation if I'm fighting God's will. It's not just a sort of mental idea that, oh, maybe I'm not really following God's will. It's a physical sensation. And I felt that this morning, and I took it to God in two-way prayer and said, what do I do? How do I get to this meeting? Can I? The answer was a flat nope. And I know I'm fighting when I go back and I start writing more questions and saying, maybe if I wrote a list, or, you know, let's get clear about this. And the answer is always there, you know, and I've often heard people share that God doesn't speak in sort of long rambling sentences to them, although some people's gods do, and that sounds great too. But I've often heard people share that God's answers are normally very direct and brief and to the point. And for me, when I'm wrestling with a decision, it's because God has already made clear to me what the answer is. God has made really clear, but I'm fighting because I don't like it. And that's normally because it's always for two reasons, either because I'm afraid or because it doesn't fit in with my little plans and designs. So yeah, so, you know, not making outreach calls, not doing step 10s, not doing meetings when I'm with my small children, because they are not old enough to go off and do their own thing. It would be harmful for them, for me to be constantly saying, can you just, hang on, go away a minute, go away.
That's 20 minutes, Rosie.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, thanks very much. And then the third area, which I've sort of gone into, where I've really been working this year on ceasing fighting, is my feelings. And, you know, really, and I've had many conversations with many of you about this, really, my job in recovery, as I see it, is to learn to tolerate discomfort. It's that simple. You know, as a person with a mental obsession, or the mental twist, whatever you want to call it, I am somebody who, I don't believe that my emotions are different to anyone else's. The problem is, for me, is that if I don't deal with them, the mental obsession will suggest to me in a very reasonable, non-crazy way that I have some food. And so I feel like for years and years, I used recovery as a way to stop feeling feelings. So I was fighting my basic human reality. You know, even when I became somebody who did step 10s, you know, daily, multiple times a day, for a long time, I saw, and I will still catch myself doing it sometimes. I will try and use that step 10 as a way of trying to feel better. And actually, at the end of a step 10, really, occasionally I might feel relief. Often I might feel relief at having shared it and brought God into it. But actually, the reality is, I'm probably still going to be feeling shitty. And as often as not, the response I get from God is that I need to just put my arms around myself and sit quietly for a few minutes and just feel some stuff. And for me, I have to put a timer or a stopwatch on, because that's so alien to me and it feels so overwhelming that more than a few minutes of that, I begin to panic. But yeah, using the program as a way of trying to have a great life, for me, I've come to realize is ceasing fighting. Is fighting. And all of those promises throughout all of the steps, and there's promises at every step of the way, even in the preface and the forewords. Those promises are all true for me some of the time. And the fact that my life is not daisies and rainbows is not a sign that God has failed, that my recovery has failed, that the big book has failed, that 12-step recovery doesn't work. It is actually a sign that I'm out there in real life, not fighting real life, not trying to rearrange the world so that I can experience ease and comfort. My MO is to spend my life moving things around me for the sole purpose of avoiding unease and discomfort. And so I am learning day by day to cease fighting my feelings and to accept that I'm a human being who has to feel feelings. I have to. I can't wallow in them. I can't let them control me or my decision making, but I have to have some time for my feelings. I haven't left much time to talk about the areas in which I'm still fighting and that I haven't ceased, but that's probably not a great way to end a share anyway. But just briefly, lest it sound like I'm somebody who has it figured out. I'm still fighting time. 2 minutes before this meeting began, I was like, oh, do you know what? I'm just going to go into my emails and just check this thing again. No. I'm still fighting the reality of having a child with a neurodiverse child with special educational needs. And I fight that because it's incredibly painful and incredibly difficult. That's my big journey that I'm on at the moment, trying to find that point of surrender and to cease fighting and to just accept exactly where we are and who he is and to stop trying to change him. And and I still on a daily basis find myself fighting the reality of the man that I live with, expecting him to be something that he's not, and repeatedly expecting him to behave in ways in which he's not capable. So there is a lot more work to be done, a lot more work. But thank God I found these big book meetings and made them a daily part of my life, because I know that I'm not on a losing battle anymore. And I felt that in OA, working hard for many, many years. I've become somebody against all odds who is willing to take spiritual action every day and multiple times a day, no matter how busy I am. And because of that, I know that I am moving slowly into behaviors that make my life calm, that enable me to cease fighting. Not to a life where everything's solved, but to a life where I'm not fighting. And when I'm not fighting, life is a hell of a lot more pleasant. And I enjoy being in it. And I feel grateful when I've ceased fighting to be in recovery, because really this is a beautiful way to live. It is extraordinary when I look at who I was and who I am now. And when I say who I was, who I still absolutely am, multiple times a day. But those multiples are tiny now compared to who I am for the vast majority of the day. I think I will leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Rosie. It was incredible share. It was really great to hear your experience and your recovery. what we're going to do now is open up the chat for people to be able to post questions to you. They'll be anonymous and I'll read them out, and then if you'd be kind enough to give a response, and we'll just make our way through the questions to the end of the meeting. So if anyone would like to ask Rosie a question, please post them in the chat to me, and I'll read them to her. So your first question, Rosie, is thank you for a great share. You said time is an ongoing issue. How do you manage your 12-step work?
It's a very good question, and on a bad day, I'm in tears on the phone to a fellow by 6 a.m. How on earth do I recover whilst being a mum and having a job and also running where I live? It's a small holding. One of the many things I have also ceased fighting is trying to have a sort of strategy, like a sort of overall vision for how it's all going to work out, and how I do this meeting this day and I spend this much time doing this, and then I have an hour for lunch when I listen to Vision, and then when the kids get home, I'm available to them between this time and that time, and then I do the washing up here and pack the school bags then, and I do my nightly review at this point. I'm somebody who spends a lot of time wanting that kind of, that big plan, that mega structure that's somehow going to work and keep me safe. The basic fact of the matter is there are not enough hours in the day to do all the things that I need to do. And I'm learning to tolerate the discomfort of things not getting done, or they're either being mess, or the kids not getting enough, or my recovery not getting what I think it needs, or something, my work time getting shaved off. I find it very, very tricky. But whenever I go completely mad with that and I call a fellow, I'm always reminded that when I'm in overwhelm and I do not know how to do it all, it's because I'm thinking about more than just what am I meant to be doing now. And as soon as I return to that, God, what am I meant to be doing now? There's an answer, and I can just do that. And then it might be 10 seconds later, it might be 10 minutes or a few hours later. Okay, God, what do I do now? And so, for me, it's about ceasing fighting that sort of need for an overall strategy, because the truth is there can't be one. I woke up this morning in a blind panic about all that there was to do today, including I had all these grand plans to plan my lead share tonight, and obviously that didn't happen. But actually all the things that I needed to do today happened, and some unexpected things as well, because most of the day I was just saying, okay, God, what next? What do I do now? I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much. Your next question is, how do you break your abstinence? What are your bottom lines?
It's a good question. I have a list of foods. If I eat the foods, I'm not abstinent. I do follow a weighted measured food plan, which for me has been the best and most effective way of keeping food out of the picture and just getting God into the picture. However, that weighted measured food plan is not my abstinence. It's my food plan, which sounds like a sort of a grey area, but it's not like it gives me the flex to just sort of have something extra and do what I want. I have food behaviors that if I do them, for example, eating off someone else's plate, when I was in my relapse, I used to just eat food off my son's plate incessantly, or picking whilst I'm making a meal, or even tasting food when I'm preparing it. I think for me, the important thing about abstinence in this fellowship, and in other fellowships, I so desperately wish that I could have abstinence bottom lines as clear as I do here in OA, but it's sadly not possible. But here in OA, the main thing I have, and that I always say to sponsees, is that it doesn't matter to me what is on your list, but what is what is so important is that it's absolutely clear whether or not you have crossed the line. So I don't get involved, I'm definitely not a sponsor who tells sponsees what they should and should not be eating. But I do make sure that when we start, it is absolutely clear and written out where their line is, because too many times in my recovery prior to doing it this way, I would just have sort of scrapes with food and I'd be feeling awful, and I'd be on the phone to my sponsor in tears going, I don't know if I'm abstinent, or that just didn't feel abstinent, but it's not like I binged, or I cannot recover like that anymore. It did not work for me, that kind of an approach. So because I was still eating compulsively. So now I just have very clear bottom lines. And if the question was actually about what I eat and don't eat, obviously I'm happy to talk about that after, another time. Please contact me.
Brilliant, thank you, Rosie. The next question is, do you always have to hit a low with something before you cease fighting, or are you learning to surrender before things get so painful? If yes, how?
What a great question. I mean, my most reliable surrenders come from being beaten to a pulp and ending up on the ground in tears. However, yes, I have learned to put things down before I reach that point. And that, again, that's only something that's happened in the last couple of years. I'm trying to think of examples. Yeah, there are quite a few foods that I have put down where I've become aware that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about them, or that they will always. I don't want to go too deep on that, because actually I don't subscribe to the theory that if a food is really delicious then we shouldn't be eating it. That I don't think that's true for me. But I think once we start to think, oh God, this food just really isn't okay, and if that continues to not feel okay, that for me is a time to consider putting it down, because I have had a couple of relapses since starting to do the program in the way that I do, and those relapses were very undramatic compared to what I used to do. Like, one of them lasted for about 30 seconds, and then the other one lasted for about 5 minutes, and they involved foods like rice cakes. Nonetheless, they were relapses because I was eating compulsively and I couldn't stop even though I wanted to. And I think because of that, those two relapses were incredibly helpful to me, because finally, I think because I'm in a daily practice of spiritual action, I'm a lot more attuned to spiritual pain now, and I'm a lot more keen to avoid it than I used to be. And so I have put down many foods and behaviors before they have killed me. The problem with that is that I'm an addict and I have a mental obsession, and if I haven't had an intense step one experience with something, then my mind will eventually go, really, was that really a problem? And I had that a few years ago with alcohol. It was a sort of a problem but not really a problem, and I didn't have a terrible step one experience with it. And then eventually I did. I had a really horrible experience and, put it down. But even that, it's nothing like the experience I've had with food. It was, I had a few too many drinks and got drunk and got drunk. And at that point, obviously, I realized I can't possibly do this. But there has been no question of me picking up alcohol since. This was, I don't know, 2 years ago, a bit more. There's been no question of me picking up alcohol since, but my head has returned to it, and I miss alcohol still sometimes. If I'm with friends and having a glass of wine on a sunny evening, I really miss it. And I don't get that if everyone's eating birthday cake. I'll look at it and smell it and think, oh, that looks and smells lovely, but I don't have that, oh God, this is so painful to me, that I don't have that thing. So yes, I am these days able and willing to make those choices before the thing sort of floors me. But I am also aware that when I do it that way, the mental obsession will always return and say, oh, it wasn't that bad. And I guess that's why I have to keep taking spiritual action daily.
Thank you, Rosie. So the next question is, this person has an ongoing struggle, which is still 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. How can they move this to overall neutrality? They've tried to manage strategies for ages. They'd love that evening PM neutrality.
I think this is very common, and somebody called me asking about that the other day. I don't know why they called me. I mean, for me, from a really basic biological point of view, I don't think it's right for me to go too many hours without eating. So actually, I have a snack. I'm not suggesting this is a solution by any means, but yeah, I find that what works best for me is to have my dinner at 5 with my kids. And when they get older and won't want to do that anymore, I'm not quite sure, you know, how I will work it. But I tend to have dinner at 5 and then a snack in the evening when I don't need much food, but I still need something to keep going. And that works really beautifully for me. And I many times over the years, you know, I've heard people say, oh, 3 meals and nothing in between. And I thought, oh God, am I cheating? Am I doing it wrong? I mean, I'm not cheating. I'm not doing it wrong. I have a dietitian who just makes my food decisions for me. So I know that it's not wrong. But, you know, I've worried, night, darling, love you. You know, I've wondered about it and worried about it. But you know, from a basic biological perspective, as I said, I'm somebody who needs food at that time of day. So that's you know, that is something that I always very carefully mention to people, because I know there are many people who just don't feel able to have snacks, which is, you know, fair enough. We've all come from pretty dark places with food. But I guess, you know, returning to what I've been saying many times today, talking about action. If that is the time when food is the loudest, then that is the time I would be looking to put in more action, more spiritual action. Is there a meeting at that time of day? Can you have regular phone calls at that time of day? You know, what are the spiritual, if eating is not an option, what are the spiritual actions that you can take? And if that's still not working, you know, is it worth talking to a food professional about how you can best manage that? And again, just to be clear, I'm not saying the answer is to have some food. But just for me, actually, I do need food more frequently than some other meal plans might allow.
Thanks, Rosie. The next question is, you spoke about your higher power being within and that you get answers to questions. How do you hear your answers?
Great question. Very difficult to answer. The long form 12-step Big Book workshop that I referred to earlier, the guy who led that was really brilliant, actually, at encouraging those of us who didn't have a God who sort of spoke an English language sentences to really listen to what our high powers did feel like. And as I said, you know, when I'm fighting, when I sometimes know what God's will is because I've got a churning feeling here. And it normally means that it's because I'm doing the opposite of what God is trying to tell me to do. I will sometimes get words, you know, frequently I will get words or answers. I find these days that when two-way prayer is for me the best possible way of connecting with God when I need actually direction, you know, proper, you know, clear direction. And what comes out is normally stuff like, I need to do this, or I've been being dishonest about this and it's time to make an amend. You know, it doesn't come out as, Rosie, you need to do this and you need to do that. For me, there's no authenticity in that. So often it comes out, it would, you know, to an omniscient observer, it would look like I'm talking to myself and giving myself instructions, but that's not my voice. Sometimes I find that my eye will just be drawn to something in a room that I had not noticed and would not have noticed, and I know that that's God saying, you know, sending me a message of some sort. So I think for me, the important thing is not how the answer comes, but putting myself in a state of openness and listening. And my experience is that I can't listen just by sitting quietly. I need to ask a question and then wait. And, and as the big book says, we relax and take it easy. I don't need to be sitting there like poised like a coiled spring, waiting for the instruction to come through. Sometimes instruction, I don't hear anything, or I don't feel anything, or my eye isn't drawn to anything, or I don't get a sense. And that normally means more will be revealed. Or sometimes it means, I find that when there is really no clear answer coming through, it means that either way will be fine. God's got my back either way. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. It's a tricky one to answer though, because a lot of it is an intuitive thought or an idea or a decision.
Brilliant, thank you, Rosie. The next question is firstly to say thank you for your share, and then how do you find moments of pause when the kids are tricky?
I don't is the reality. And again, I've had to cease fighting that, and to this sort of notion that I could just go off to another room and do a few breaths, or send them away. If they're being tricky, it's normally because their emotional needs aren't being met. So for me, in the middle of that, to take myself off to take care of my emotional needs, that's not going to help them, and it's going to make the situation worse. And I had times where I tried that, and I'd sort of just say I need to go away. Of course, sometimes I still will, but I have had to develop an arsenal of tools to use in the moment where I'm being screamed at by two people at the same time. And I spoke to my sponsor about this a couple of months ago, and she said, you know what, call so-and-so and talk about this, because this person often shares about, how step 10 really doesn't need to be a full inventory. And that, there's nothing in the big book about taking a full inventory whenever we need to do a step 10 and then calling somebody and reading it out, which is sort of how I've been taught to do it. And, the fact remains that when I do that, I get the most sort of spiritual relief and connection. However, that's obviously not possible when I'm on my own in charge of two children who've gone off the rails. And so I've started just doing what the big book says, actually. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed someone. And so what I do now is generally I don't do calls and texts when I'm with my children, but I will, if I can, I will send a quick message. I have a fellow with whom I send multiple messages every day now, my sort of mini step 10s. And I will literally type out, God, please remove my resentment at my children for screaming, and help me tune into your will for me, which is, I know, for me to practice love and tolerance, or to just sit with my discomfort at this sensory overload, or, whatever it is that I know God would have me be. And it's a sort of one sentence text message that takes me maybe 20 seconds to type out. And I'm finding that really helpful, actually. But sometimes it's a question of just saying in my head, or sometimes even out loud, because if they're both screaming at me, they can't hear me anyway, of just saying, God, this is awful, I can't bear it, please help. God, this is awful, I can't bear it, please help, on repeat. Because actually I can't change the situation. And I can't even change how I physiologically react to that kind of extreme sensory overload. All I can change is whether or not I'm willing to tolerate that discomfort.
Thank you, Rosie. Next question is, can you tell us other big book study meetings that you found have helped you? Thank you for a really great share.
Oh, thank you. I can't. As I said, some of the meetings I would love to go, I can't tell you how lovely it is to be in a Zoom room. As I said at the beginning, my home group is a Vision for You, which is a phone meeting. I never see anyone. I haven't, I came in post-COVID, so I haven't been, managed to go over to a convention yet. And it's an incredible meeting. It's completely changed my life and my relationship with food and my relationship with God. But it doesn't feel very personal. So thank God for modern comms that allows me to be connected to so many of you. So I don't know much about meetings at all, and I always say to my sponsees, it's on the little thing that I send them when we start working. Make sure you seek out Zoom meetings too. But my reality is, as a working mum of young kids, I just can't get to probably 90% of the meetings that I would like to get to. And it's just a season, as my American friends always say. It's a season in my life, and I love that phrase because it is. And my kids will get older, and I will be able to do more Zooms, and maybe, God forbid, the odd face-to-face once in a while. Although I live in Devon, so I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm really sorry. I don't have much to say to that one, I'm afraid. I wish I did.
No problem, thank you. Final quick question. Could you tell us a little bit more about your two-way prayer process? Is it done in a group, or do you do it on your own individually?
I do it on my own. And actually the woman who taught me to do it, who's just a recovery angel in my life, she taught me to do it, and we did it together. And, I read out my answers and she reflected back what she'd heard, and then we swapped round, and it was so powerful. And I would so love for that to be part of my daily practice. Again, the reality is I can't, I schedule calls with sponsees. That's the only schedule calling that I do, because I find that I constantly end up cancelling or not making it to the phone on time because something will be kicking off with the kids. So I don't do that. I do two-way prayer on my own. It's as close to a bottom line as it can be, that if I achieve nothing else in the morning, I'm finding at the moment the kids are getting up earlier and earlier. It doesn't matter how early I get up, like they're getting up earlier and earlier. So, my sort of lovely morning routine, which takes about 30-40 minutes, I'm going to be getting up at 3 a.m. at this rate, which is not viable. But yeah, it really, if I achieve nothing else, I need to spend 10 minutes doing two-way prayer, and I just do it on my own. And I just write a question, and then I write the answers. And sometimes it just becomes a sort of, a two-way prayer, a two-way process. And I'm saying stuff, and then my other stuff is coming from my higher power. It's quite freeform and not very structured, but I always come away from it knowing what I need to know. And I go into it really not knowing what I need to know, really not knowing. It's quite incredible. Again, it's just this wonderful form of witchcraft upon which I completely rely.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you so much, Rosie. And apologies to Alina. I'd muted Alina. Unfortunately, I hadn't made her co-host, so she wasn't able to come in and continue on with the meeting to hand over. Thank you. Thanks, Rosie. Thanks, Alina.
All good. Thank you, Rosie. Q&A has now come to a close. Thank you to our guest speaker, Rosie, for your service, time, and energy. We will now open the chat to share our numbers for outreach. For those who would like to, please share your name and numbers. Please could all available abstinent sponsors indicate if you are available to sponsor. For any newcomers, we have a newcomer hub where newcomer greeters, I guess, Cara and Alan, is it you? Who else is a newcomer greeter? Claire, sorry. Karen Claire will be very happy to have a more informal chat or answer any questions. To any newcomers who would like to stay behind at the end of the meeting to ask questions, please raise your hand electronically now, and we will invite you to breakout room on Zoom, where our newcomer greeter, Cara, will be able to help. I don't know if we can see any hands. Sure. Can't see any hands at the moment. This group also has a WhatsApp group for fellowship and inspiration. Please see the chat box for the link and or contact. Who does it contact? Alan for more details? Is it you? I'm not sure. Again. You're muted, Alan. So I don't know who should people contact. No one. Okay, I'm skipping. So we do have a WhatsApp group, and you can see the details now in the chat. We will close the meeting in the same way we always close a new Freedom Big Book study, by reading 12 promises of recovery as laid out in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, bottom of page 83, starting with the paragraph, if we are painstaking, and ending with, if we work for them. Rosie, would you like to read promises? It's now, you can see them on the screen.
I can, and I would love to, thank you. The promises. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Our meetings are recurring on a weekly basis, and our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, 20th of September at 7:30 p.m. And may your higher power bless you and keep you until then. Recording can stop now. Thank you.